Jim, let me ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Do you want to first of all tell people about your involvement with Angel Studios, a little bit about your career and why this particular movie, Sound of Freedom? It's opening in early July? Is it July? When does it come out?
It comes out July 4th week, so next week. Next week it's out in theaters nationwide.
So let me turn to Jim. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So do you want to detail out your association with Angel Studios? Tell everybody first who Angel Studios are, what they've done. And I've watched a lot of The Chosen, by the way, which I thought was extremely high quality. Do you tell us about the studio? Tell us about your involvement with them, about your career, and then about your attraction to this particular movie.
Well, let's start with the movie first. I have 3 adopted children from China. I became aware of the dangers that go on with children around the world and through that process. Then I became aware of Tim Ballard, and coincidentally, then my friend Eduardo Verostegui brought me this script because many of the actors that they had offered it to didn't want to get involved in this particular project. I read the script. I loved the movie Taken, and I thought this is like Taken, but with a much bigger heart. Then Tim Ballard came to the meeting. He had seen 2 films that I did. One was called The Count of Monte Cristo, and then the other one was The Passion of the Christ, and he felt that I'd be the right guy to play him. Angel Studios, I had no connection to them until a few months ago when they wanted to do this movie, and their idea was to sell 2 million tickets for these 2 million trafficked children.
So why is it that a number of actors, why in your estimation did a number of actors turn down the opportunity to play the role? And why did you decide to forego that risk and to climb aboard?
I foregoed the risk because when you have 3 children that you loved and you'd give your life for, it kind of connects into Tim Ballard, and Tim did this for this little girl and the children that he saves. It's something is a greater purpose that even your career, like I went through this with Mel Gibson when we did The Passion, that my career was the last thing I thought of. What I thought about was the God I love. And I put this, and how I look at it is that this God that I love, he loves me and he deserved to be loved back. And so I would be nothing without him. He gave me my purpose in this life. So the Tim Ballard, I was very fortunate that he had seen those films. And when I looked at, and I think Tim made this comparison, Schindler's List was a very powerful weapon, but it came 50 years too late. This film is now. This is exposing it now during that time. And I believe that is probably why it's easier to get an actor to do a movie 50 years later. There's no controversy. It's over. But the individuals, imagine if Rwanda, if that story had been made, that movie had been made during that time, or that they could see it. You have to look at these situations and understand that good people sit back and do nothing and allow this evil to occur. There's got to be people that stand up in the time that it occurs. And that's what drew me to the whole story in the first place.
And how do you feel about the movie? Now you've seen the movie in its entirety. It's about to be released. It's a fully fledged, high quality production. I was particularly impressed by the cinematography. It's also extraordinarily well edited. The acting, I don't want to flatter you, but the acting is extremely high quality. It's a very realistic movie. How do you feel about your involvement now that everything is done? And how do you feel about what would you say, the production capacity of Angel Studios, which is a relatively, it's a relative newcomer on the mass entertainment block?
When I was sitting next to Tim Ballard and he leaned over and he started to weep heavily, I knew I did my job.
So do you want to run us briefly through, I don't want to give away the entire plot because that would obviously be pointless, but do you want to just run us briefly through, Jim, the plot of the movie, and then I'll turn to Tim and fill in some of the background details of his life.
So I play Tim Ballard. He's Homeland Security. He sets up these sting operations to take down these very, very bad men to save trafficked children. In one particular case, one of the traffickers that he takes down, Ernst Lipachinski, he rescues this boy, and the little boy turns to him and says, "Will you save my sister?" And Tim goes back, gets the direction from above and from his wife, and goes back and he sells everything to find this little girl.
So what I liked about the script, so I've noticed that one of the most effective ways of communicating complex ideas effectively is to particularize the problem. And so what happens in this movie is that the broad problem of slavery and human trafficking, and the somewhat narrower problem of sexual trafficking of children is zeroed, is what focused on a particular case. And so that gives the movie a very powerful narrative underpinning, right? Because when a problem is particularized and you can see how it affects actual specific people's lives, it becomes much more realistic and much more palpable. And I thought the movie did a good job of that. Tim, do you want to walk everybody listening through? Let's go back into the details of your life. Now, you worked for this. You worked for the Special Forces per se. And who were you working for before you decided to forego your career and to pursue the case that we're describing?
So I worked for 12 years as a special agent and undercover operator for the Department of Homeland Security, the investigative division called Homeland Security Investigations. 10 of those years were spent on the border, tracking child traffickers, people who would exploit children with child exploitation material. So I really learned a lot. In 2006, the laws changed in the United States. And for the first time, U.S. agents were permitted and encouraged to go overseas and find children who Americans were abusing, and we could now hold those Americans accountable as if they had committed that crime on U.S. soil. That's what really changed my life, because I speak Spanish fluently, and they sent me overseas, south of the border. That's when my eyes opened up, and I started seeing the children that I used to only see mostly on the pornography, on the child exploitation material cases. But it was tormenting me. The U.S. government unwittingly was, because if I couldn't find that connection back to the United States, the American kid or the American pedophile, I had to come home. But the problem is I've already been exposed to the children. I've already been exposed to the problem, and oftentimes have made myself the bait. And in 2012, I had enough on this case. I went further than otherwise I probably should have. The movie didn't have time to tell you that there was another case in Haiti at the same time that I was working, thinking there was a U.S. nexus. And I was told in both instances to come home and you couldn't work these cases. And that's when I had a very consequential conversation with my wife. And I said, if I stay here, if I do this operation with or without my badge, it doesn't matter at this point, I can do the work. We will save kids. But I have to lose my job, and we have 6 children, and this is a moral dilemma like I've never faced in my life. And I was hoping my wife would have responded with, "Get your ass home. You can't abandon us. First of all, you're going to die without the top cover of the U.S. government if you continue this, and who's going to pay the bills and feed the kids?" She didn't say that. She said to me, "You have to quit your job." And it was that easy for her. It became spiritual for her even. She felt a calling and a responsibility that she might have to reckon with one day when she meets her maker. And I knew that she felt that way when she told me this. in the crucial moment of decision, about 2 days before I ended up turning my badge and gun over and went private, she said to me, "I will not let you jeopardize my salvation by not doing this." And when she said those words, and I knew she meant those words, that changed everything for me. And we jumped into really just an irrational act of service, I might call it, because it wasn't rational in many ways. But ultimately, it ended in the operation you see depicted in the film, which shows 54 children, some adult women, young adult women were in that group as well, rescued on that island. But what the movie doesn't have the time to report is that in actuality, it was 120. There was 2 other locations being taken down at the same time, and there's a documentary that's going to follow in the wake of Sound of Freedom called Triple Take. Angel Studios will put it out, documenting the entire story. And so in the end, it was successful, and we were able to build upon that success. And I founded Operation Underground Railroad. I run another foundation that was founded by Glenn Beck called the Nazarene Fund, and we're doing these kind of operations all over the world today.
So let's go back in time to before you worked as a security agent for the Homeland or an agent for the Homeland Security Investigations Unit. How were you trained to do that? Like, what was your background before you became employed as an agent? And what was it about you that made you capable of engaging in this sort of operation?
So I got a graduate degree in international politics. And I always wanted to be in federal law enforcement. My first job was CIA. I was there during 9/11, working in the operations center. In the wake of 9/11, I found out that I studied terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. That was actually the degree I got at the Monterey Institute of International Studies. And so I was an easy recruit into the CIA because, 9/11 had just happened. When I found out that one of the terrorists, Mohammed Atta, had staged his attack from Mexicali, Mexico, and crossed the border, and I speak Spanish, I wanted to go fight terrorism on the southern border. So I ended up jumping ship from CIA, and I joined the newly created Homeland Security Department, and became a special agent. For 6 months, I was tracking those kind of movements, not human trafficking or child exploitation, but money, guns, terrorism. 6 months into that endeavor, I was called into the office of a supervisor, and they asked me if I would please forego everything that I wanted to do with my career and help them start a child crimes unit. I do not know why they asked me. One thing he did say to me was, "You're a young agent, but you're a person of faith, and we know that about you, and that's a requirement, or your soul will be crushed."